Now I want to do a story problem involving these piecewise functions. This can be a little involved. I'm going to do number 67 out of the book, out of section 3.5. So this is 3.5 and number 67. And this is just like one of your homework problems. So let me read it, and as I read it, I'll write down some information and see if we can figure out what's going on. A certain paperback sells for $12. So the book costs $12. The author is paid royalties on 10%. So the way this works is the author makes his money, he gets a 10% cut of when these books are sold. But as it turns out, for the first 10,000 books sold, his cut is 10%. And then from 10,000 to 15,000, so the next 5,000 that's sold, he gets a bigger cut. It goes up to 12.5%. And then anything sold over 15,000, he even gets a larger percent. He gets 15%. So the idea is the more books he sells, the higher his royalty is. So now they're asking us, the problem says, find a piecewise defined function R that specifies the total royalties if X copies are sold. So we're going to assume X is going to be the number of books sold. Now this is a piecewise function because there's actually going to be three different equations. You have to write an equation for each of these levels. In other words, we're going to write an equation if the number of books sold is between 0 and 10,000. And then we're going to write a second equation that will work if the number of books sold are between 10,000 and 15,000. And then we'll have to write a third equation that we use for when over 15,000 books are sold. So let's do this. Let's say for the first 10,000. One way of saying that is when X is between 0 and 10,000. Well, R stands for the royalties, or the amount of money the author makes. For this case, it's pretty straightforward. You take the cost of the book, which is $12, you multiply it by how many books are sold, and then his cut is 10%, which you convert that to a decimal. 10% as a decimal is 0.1. So when I multiply this together, I have an equation 1.2x. So if the number of books are sold between 0 and 10,000, you enter that number in for x, and that's how much money he makes. So for instance, just for fun, if they sold 5,000 books, 5,000 times 1.2, and he would make $6,000. All right, so that's the first level. Now, the second level, that's when you have between 10,000 and 15,000. So, let's write this like this. Between 10,000 and 15,000. Or to write it mathematically, I would say X greater than 10,000 less than or equal to 15,000. So this is the second level. And this is the level where he's going to make 12.5%. But here's a tricky thing. He's still going to make, for the first 10,000 books, he's going to make the 10% royalty. And then anything above 10,000, the number of books between 10,000 and 15,000, he's going to make the 12.5% on all the books over 10,000. So I've really got two things. So the total royalty, if I write it out, the total royalty is the money from the first 10,000 books plus the money from the books over 10,000. So when you think about it, the money from the first 10,000 books, I actually just figured that equation out. This is the amount of money when the books are up to 10,000. So I could simply say 1.2 times 10,000. So this is the amount of royalties he gets for those first 10,000 books. Now, I need to figure out how much he's going to make from anything above 10,000. So the number of books above 10,000 would simply be x minus 10,000. So in other words, if they sell 12,000 books, well, how many books are above 10,000? It would be 2,000. 12,000 minus 10,000. If they happen to sell 14,000 books, and you ask, well, how many books is that above 10,000? Or you take 14,000 minus 10,000. So this right here is the number of books above 10,000. And how much does he make off those books? Well, he gets paid $12 per book, and the royalty now is 12.5%. So as a decimal, that's 0.125. So once again, in the parentheses is the number of books that he sells above 10,000, and each book costs $12, and the money he makes, or his royalty, is 12.5%, so it's times 0.125. So now if I start working out this equation sum, 1.2 times 10,000 is 12,000. 12 times 0.125 equals 1.5, and I'll move it in front of the parentheses, so 1.5 times x minus 10,000. And I'm going to multiply out this parenthesis. So I have 1.5x, the distributive property, 1.5 times negative 10,000 should be negative 15,000. And now I can combine these two like terms, and I'll end up with 1.5x minus 3,000. So this is an equation of how much money he's going to make when the number of books sold is between 10,000 and 15,000. So this is the first scenario, the first 10, when it's between 0 and 10,000. This is the second scenario. And now, the third scenario is when he sells more than 15,000. So what I'm going to do for the third scenario, when it's more than 15,000, well, the first 15,000, I'm going to figure out the money he makes by using the equation I just came up with. I'm going to plug in 15,000 into this 1.5x minus 3,000 equation. And that's going to be the amount of money he makes on the first 15,000 books. And I'm going to add to that the money from the books over 15,000. So, how would we write that? Well, the first 15,000, I'm just going to simply use the equation I just came up with. I'm going to plug 15,000 in for the x here. So it's going to be 1.5 times 15,000 minus 3,000. Now, how about plus the money from the books over 15,000? Well, here we go again. the books over 15,000 would be x minus 15,000. Each of the books are $12, except now he gets 15% royalty, so you multiply that by 0.15. So now, let's multiply 1.5 times 15,000. That's 22,500 minus 3,000. 12 times 0.15, this parenthesis times 0.15 is 1.8. So I have 1.8 times, in the parentheses, x minus 15,000. So let's go ahead and combine these. 22,500 minus 3,000 is 19,500. And if I multiply out my parentheses, that's 1.8x, and then 1.8 times 15,000 minus 27,000. So, when I'm all done, it should be 1.8x minus 7,500. So now I have three equations, and let's summarize now. So let's write it like this. R equals. So when the number of books is from 0 to 10,000, whoops, let me put the X here. So that first level, we said our equation was 1.2x. And now the second level was from 10,000 to 15,000. And the equation we came up with was 1.5x minus 3,000. And then for the last level, which is x greater than 15,000, and the equation there was 1.8x minus 7,500. So that was a pretty nasty problem, but that is an example of piecewise function story problem.